you see something that tall that's just such a part of your life and a part of the skyline, you're not assuming it was going to collapse that way. But in the years following, I became a tour guide and learned a lot about New York architecture. Something people don't really talk about very much is that in 1945, towards the end of World War II, B-52 hit the Empire State Building on a Saturday night. It crashed right in. And the Empire State Building was open for business that Monday, because the Empire State Building was pre-war architecture. It was rock solid, steel girders, it had a granite exterior, and nothing's going to knock down the Empire State Building short of a nuclear bomb. The Twin Towers, however, were actually built very, very flimsy. If you were standing on Tower 1 on a windy day, you would see Tower 2. I mean, those towers could go 2 feet in either direction. Now, if you're in the building, you wouldn't feel that. But they actually did move that much. There was a lot of cheap construction going on in New York in the early 70s when those towers were being built. They definitely built it on the cheap. It's a hard thing to say now in retrospect, but it's true. But that's why, you know, we all saw how it happened. That we know now, that's why it collapsed the way it did and how easily it collapsed. But when you're in New York, you're always taking the subway, and most subway stations have at least 4 exits. And unless you do it every single day, you kind of forget which exit goes to which corner. You know, the north corner, the south, east, or the west. And what New Yorkers do instinctively is when you get out of a subway, you look up and you try to either spot the 2 towers or you try to spot the Empire State Building, because the Empire State Building is going to be, especially when you're in the Village, because the Village is very hard to navigate. There's lots of small streets. It was a week and a half after 9/11, so that was 9/11 was a Tuesday, Saturday. Following Saturday was the first time I went to the Village, because you couldn't get near the Village before that unless you lived there. And I got out at the 9th Street station, and I got up the stairs, and I just instinctively, and that was the moment that I really knew the towers were gone. Because like I said, I saw it on TV. I mean, they didn't stop playing it days on end. I'm sure they didn't do that here too. But that's when it was like, wow, those towers are gone. I mean, it really hit home at that moment. There was a factory fire called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but up until the point of 9/11, they considered that to be the biggest disaster in New York City history. And there was a lot of written history at the time of people who were there when the girls were jumping out just from a 9-story building and describing how horrible it was. So you can only imagine, you know, a building that was over 100 stories tall, just, you know, the carnage. But of course, you know, it's hard to think about, but they landed reasonably close to the building, and we saw what happened to that area. So they, you know, at least the evidence got buried before their families had to see it or anything like that. Well, this may not have gotten a lot of coverage, but every crazy whack job in New York City decided to have a field day in the weeks following 9/11. As I told you guys earlier, I would take the subway to Grand Central Terminal, and then I would get a commuter train there north to Bridgeport where I was teaching, and I did not want to get anywhere near Grand Central in the days following 9/11. So I started catching the train up in Harlem, which I actually lived fairly close to. 2 or 3 times in the 2 weeks following 9/11, we had bomb threats called in on the train. I mean, it happened constantly. There were, and like any crazy person in New York, and you got 8 million people in the city, not to mention the suburbs, they thought, boy, this is my time to shine. So bomb threats were called in constantly. The subways kept getting taken out of commission. Something you have to realize, about 2/3 of the subway trains had a stop. I shouldn't say the trains, the train lines had a stop within a half a block of ground zero. So what happened is everything came down and you couldn't get anywhere near those tunnels. So you would have to take a subway, well, at first it would be 10 stops north of ground zero, then you have to switch to a bus and it would take you around the perimeter of ground zero, and then you'd continue on if you had to go south of ground zero or towards Brooklyn.